Top 3 Scariest Reddit Stories You Won't Believe. Story 1. The Thing in the Walls. Reddit user Throwaway67 posted a chilling story about an old apartment they had rented in a quiet suburban area. The apartment was a steal, cheap rent in a seemingly peaceful neighborhood. Everything about the place seemed normal at first, but soon the Redditor began noticing strange sounds at night. At first, they assumed it was just the creaks of an old building settling, but it wasn't long before the noises grew louder and more distinct. Every night, they would hear something scraping against the walls. It sounded like claws, long and sharp, scraping and scratching relentlessly. Unable to sleep, they tried to investigate. Armed with nothing but their phone flashlight, they crawled through the apartment's attic space, but found nothing. That was until one night, when they woke up to a figure standing at the edge of their bed. The figure was hunched, its face obscured in the dark, but what stood out was its unnaturally long fingers, scraped raw and bleeding, just like the scratches they had heard on the walls. Terrified, they moved out the next day and posted their story on Reddit, warning others about the apartment. What they discovered in the comments was even more unsettling. Other people who had lived there had heard the same thing. One user claimed to have witnessed a similar figure before they too moved out. The most terrifying part of it all? The building was demolished shortly after the post went viral, but not before several others came forward with strange encounters. The last comment on Throwaway67's post read, "You were never alone in that apartment." Story 2. The Midnight Visitor. User GhostHunter112 shared a terrifying story about a friend's encounter at an isolated cabin in the woods. The friend had rented the cabin through a small, lesser-known Airbnb listing. Located miles from the nearest town, it was the perfect spot for a weekend of solitude and relaxation. However, as the night fell, strange things started happening. At first, it was just the sounds, scratching at the door, low whispers on the wind. The friend assumed it was just the wind or animals, but as the hours passed, the scratching became more insistent. Eventually there was a knock. A single, slow knock at the door. When the friend opened the door, there was no one there. The front porch was empty, but the air felt charged, heavy with something unexplainable. He closed the door, but the knocking continued, getting louder and more frantic. The friend decided to call the host, but the phone line was dead and no one responded to the knocks. Frustrated, the friend tried to go to bed, but the feeling of being watched never left. The noises continued until the small hours of the morning. When they finally decided to leave, the key wouldn't turn in the lock. The door refused to open. In the end, the friend fled through a window, only to look back and see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, its eyes glowing in the dark. When the story was posted on Reddit, many commented that they knew the cabin, and the few who dared to visit it reported similar experiences. But the most chilling detail? The figure in the doorway didn't belong to anyone who had ever lived there. Story 3. The Sleepwalking Horror. A Redditor, Sleepwalker177, posted a terrifying encounter about a house they rented for a weekend stay in a small town. The house was beautiful, a Victorian-style building with old wooden floors and intricate carvings. The owner, an elderly woman, was kind and welcoming, but there was one strange rule: never lock the doors at night. Despite this odd request, everything seemed perfectly fine on the first night. But by the second, Sleepwalker177 woke up in the middle of the night to find themselves standing in front of the door, wide awake but completely unaware of how they had gotten there. They had sleepwalked all the way to the door, even though they had no recollection of doing so. A bit shaken, they locked the door and went back to bed. The next night it happened again. But this time they awoke outside, standing in the garden with the door wide open behind them. Panic set in. They quickly left the house, but when they returned to the town center, the locals gave them a strange look. "You're not the first to have those dreams," one man said. "She's done it to others." The Redditor later learned that the elderly woman who owned the house had a reputation for inviting people to stay, then using a strange sleepwalking ritual to lure them into her trap. The house was rumored to be built on cursed land, and many who stayed there were said to have fallen into the same trance-like sleepwalking state. The most horrifying part? The woman's last words were whispered as the Redditor left: "You will return in your sleep."